Hello, everyone. Welcome back. It has now been just a little bit over 2 weeks since a catastrophic once in a generation wave of flash flooding hit the hill country region of Texas, and it's still fairly high in the news cycle, although it has fallen out of popular conversation. But I'm going to bring up some points about it today because I think it's something that deserves to be talked about. Over 100 people are still unaccounted for as of the research for this video. The death toll has now hit 134, with at least 95 of those deaths in the area of Kerr County. Today, I'll be laying out various claims that have been made about this tragedy, debunking the myths, and shining a spotlight on the people who are using this time of loss and grief as a chance to take political shots and air out their hate specifically for conservatives. So our look into the flooding is going to be mostly centered in Kerr County, as I mentioned a moment ago, and particularly on one of the most concentrated centers of this tragedy, which is a campground known as Camp Mystic. This was a Christian girls' summer camp along the banks of the Guadalupe River, which was also central to the flooding, and also in the vicinity of Cypress Creek, at the site of at least 27 deaths of campers and staff members in the early morning hours of July 4th. The area on which the camp sits is historically prone to flooding, but the amount of water that came through on that night was unprecedented and, as it will turn out, unforeseeable. The more we learn about the disaster, it seems that the entire situation surrounding Camp Mystic and Kerr County in general was a perfect storm, quite literally. The geography includes various one-lane bridges, crossings back and forth, which officials call low water crossings, little creeks and small bridges. And if those get taken out, it creates an archipelago of inaccessible land and basically small islands that nobody can get to. And in addition to that, at this campground, some of the cabins were built close enough to the river to be inside the flood range. And also, another compounding factor is that the camp is intentionally low tech, requires campers and some of the counselors to turn in their devices, which makes sense. You don't want to have a lot of tech while you're at a summer camp. But that did keep them from getting some of the emergency alerts or being able to call out to anyone once the flooding began. Some people, particularly deeply partisan left wing personalities with an axe to grind, have passed harsh judgment on the camp's decision to build the new cabins in the spot where they did. NPR News provides a quote from someone named Sarah Prell. She's a professor at Syracuse University, saying, quote, "It's a mystery to me why they weren't taking proactive steps to move structures away from the risk, let alone challenging what seems to be a very reasonable map that shows these structures were in the 100-year flood zone," end quote. And that references a series of decisions at FEMA um, that was back and forth with the camp, appealing a redraw of the boundaries of the 100-year flood zone. So what that is, that's the highest water level that FEMA expects will occur, basically what the 100-year storm will look like, and it has a 1% chance of happening in any given year. However, this does not put the blame on the camp. If the appeals had been considered dangerous, FEMA could easily have said no, could have denied and left the boundaries where they were. And quite obviously, the camp was lively. From some of my research, it was growing, it was dramatically expanding, so they needed more room. And it stands to reason that when you need more room, you request to use land that seems like, in all likelihood, it's out of harm's way, barring extreme events. NPR does go on to admit in the same article, to their slight credit, that the flood was far more severe than what FEMA could have ever expected, even in the 100-year model. So this kind of becomes a moot point because the water would have gone beyond that 100-year line in any case. And if the cabins had been built outside that range, they may have still been in danger. Nobody knows. This fact alone should carry a lot of power in dispelling all the finger pointing and the blame games, since no one could have possibly prepared for something on this order of magnitude. And that's confirmed by Chris Stubing, executive director of the Texas Floodplain Management Association. He said that the rain and flooding were so far above and beyond any precedent in Kirk County that it would be hard to call the floodplain management a failure. And that last bit is a direct quote from Chris Stubing. Now, to demonstrate the intensity of the rainfall and how fast the water was rising, here's a few numbers to consider. The Guadalupe River came up by 26 feet in the short span of just 45 minutes. So that's the height of a two-story building and a rate of 1 foot of water every 1.7 minutes. So that is pouring in. And these numbers are probably on the liberal side from graphs showing the water level over time. The rise was much more concentrated. It was exponential as it went on. It got faster. So we can see that's kind of compressed, and it would be at in the latter half more than 1.7 feet per minute. We can see from this graph of river gauges on the Guadalupe River and the surrounding area that the water level rose gradually leading up to 3 a.m. and then followed by a much sharper rise just after the turn of the hour. So the red line there, you can see it shooting up just after 3 a.m. Another statistic reported in Le Monde explains that 12 inches of rain came down every hour, which amounts to 1/3 of the region's annual precipitation being dumped down in one single night. So now we've established kind of a base and a foundation of how swift and severe the flooding was. This should give us a new lens to hang on to as we go forward, viewing many of the claims that have been made, blaming President Trump's funding and personnel cuts for the casualties. And one of these accusations comes from someone named Ron Filipkowski, editor of self-described independent news network Midas Touch. He posted saying, quote, "The people in Texas voted for government services controlled by Donald Trump and Greg Abbott," and that is exactly what they're getting. The official accounts of the Democrat Party, the Democrats, posted a headline reading, quote, "As floods hit, key roles were vacant at weather service offices in Texas," end quote. And they added a commentary, a caption reading, "Staffing shortages at the National Weather Service's San Angelo and San Antonio offices doubled under the Trump administration." So obviously insinuating that Trump's budget cuts and personnel cuts had something to do with the results of this flooding. Even a U.S. Democrat senator added his voice to the chorus of accusations, posting, "Accurate weather forecasting helps avoid fatal disasters. There are consequences to Trump's brainless attacks on public workers like meteorologists," end quote. Thankfully, many public figures on both the left and the right have mobilized, as well as independent meteorologists, and swiftly debunked the claims along such lines. CBS meteorologist Avery Tomasco responded to these criticisms on X, saying, a bit of a longer quote here, quote, "All I'll say is this, the National Weather Service issued a flood watch for Kerr County more than 12 hours ahead of the catastrophic flood. A flash flood warning was issued for Hunt and Ingram 3 hours before the Guadalupe started to climb. They did their job and they did it well," end quote. So there you have it straight from someone who is familiar with the topic. And there's more. Nina Turner, who is a liberal herself, still had a bit of decency to check the facts and post a rebuttal. Quote, "The GOP's budget cuts to NOAA are set to take effect at the start of fiscal year 2026, which begins on October 1st, 2025. Anyone making the deaths of the children in Texas about partisan politics is morally bankrupt. Please reflect," end quote. And if you need more than a meteorologist and even a Democrat pushing back, there is an AP report citing Jason Runyon from the National Weather Service office in the heart of it, so he knows what's going on, saying, quote, "The National Weather Service office in New Braunfels, which delivers forecasts for Austin, San Antonio, and the surrounding areas, had extra staff on duty during the storms, where the office would typically have two forecasters on duty during clear weather. They had up to 5 on staff," end quote. So that's an important fact to note when you hear somebody saying that they were understaffed, that they didn't have enough personnel to get the warnings out. Keep in mind, they did have much more staff than they would normally have. They were aware of the event and they were prepared. And we have an official timeline I'll briefly run through here, which should give us a good picture of what was going on in the weather agencies while all this was unfolding. On July 2nd, Texas Division of Emergency Management activated emergency response resources due to NWS warnings of heavy rainfall and potential flash flooding, so they were prepared 2 days in advance. On July 3rd, 1:18 p.m. afternoon, the San Antonio office issued a flood watch for the at-risk regions. So this is the first real warning that goes out July 3rd. At 6:10 p.m., the NWS Prediction Center issued a warning of likely flash flooding and forecasted hourly rainfall in excess of 2 to 3 inches. The first flash flood watch in Kerr County was issued at 12:41 a.m., early morning, July 4th. So this is a point I want to stop on for a minute before we keep going down the timeline. Another factor that just makes all of this worse is that it occurred in like the small hours of the morning, 12 a.m. to 3 a.m. and a bit beyond to 4 a.m. So people were not awake. People were not necessarily watching the situation as it progressed. They were waking up to find this, and that just made everything more complex again. About half an hour later, after that first flash flood watch, NWS upgraded from watch to warning and activated the cell phone wireless emergency alert. So this is roughly 2 hours in advance of the time when the flooding intensified, as we saw in the graph. Throughout the early morning, more warnings were issued almost every hour and continued to increase in severity over time. A total of 22 NWS alerts were issued from July 3rd to July 4th. These warnings cast a very broad net, going out on social media, weather radio, NWS website, and emergency alerts, as mentioned earlier. And I'm not usually one to say trust the experts, but in this case, I think we can be very confident to say that they did all they could in as timely a manner as they could possibly do it. Circumstances were not in anybody's favor here, and the early morning timing was the main hindrance to the warnings reaching the victims in time. So now we come to the main point I want to address, which is the responses that we've read so far. They are the tame ones compared to what I'm about to read to you. Perhaps the most prominent of these more vicious backlash tweets was from a pediatrician, Christina Probst, who reposted a story about the disaster and added a caption, "May all visitors, children, non-MAGA voters, and pets be safe and dry. Kerr County MAGA voted to gut FEMA. They deny climate change. May they get what they voted for. Bless their hearts." So the only word that comes to mind there is sickening. And I have a hard time fathoming what a person's heart and mind have to be like to immediately just spew out this calloused and snarky response on the heels of a tragedy. Obviously, she has a lot of hate harbored in her heart for it to just come out like that as soon as she sees that something bad has happened to these people that she obviously holds deep disdain for. She could have just said, "May everyone in Kerr County be safe and dry," but she thinks about MAGA so much that she had to include non-MAGA voters specifically in her wording. And it's just deep moral corruption is all it is. Justice, fortunately, did come swiftly, and Miss Probst was promptly fired from the pediatric practice. Another viral post came from someone by the name of Sade Perkins, ranting about how Camp Mystic is white only and taking aim at the children's families for sending them to the camp in the first place. So here's how that sounded.
But Camp Mystic is a whites only girls Christian camp. They don't even have a token Asian. They don't have a token black person. It is a all white only conservative Christian camp. If you ain't white, you ain't right, you ain't getting in, you ain't going. Period. And I think that context needs to be said in this matter. It's not to say that we don't want the girls to be found, whatever girls that are missing or whatever right now, but you best believe, especially in today's political climate, if this were a group of Hispanic girls, especially with them being in East Texas, it should be most likely Hispanic. If this were a group of Hispanic girls out there, this would not be getting this type of coverage that they're getting. No one would give a fuck. And all these white people, the parents of these little girls, would be saying things like they need to be deported, they shouldn't have been here in the first place, and yada yada yada. So before y'all come at me, before y'all start leaving hate comments on my page about, oh, these are just kids and they don't know no better, da, 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 da. The parents of these children who are choosing, and it is a choice in 2025, it is definitely a freaking choice to go into East Texas and to make a all-white enclave exclusionary just for white people, with all the black people in East Texas, with all the Hispanic people in East Texas, somehow, some way, you have carved out an all-white, whites-only enclave.
And I think we've heard enough there to get the point. But that's not where this story ends with Sade Perkins. before I get on to that, I just want to respond to a few things she was saying in the video. Number one, it's not whites only. Like, you would do the barest amount of research and you could find out otherwise. Pictures posted by Camp Mystic and by people adjacent to them show um, people of all races, um, all standing together, all smiling. It's not even segregated if you're gonna try to pull that. Um, and she's worried about token black, token Asian. How does the race of the camp matter to the situation in the slightest anyway? There are children that are dead, and the last thing we need to be doing is worrying about racism. And this is what you have to understand. People in the liberal camp think that we make everything about race. That is a projection of their own mind. When we choose a camp to send kids to, we are not thinking, is it white? That's what they think we're like. That's not what we're like. Um, yeah, and then she said if it was Hispanic children, nobody would care. They would be saying deport them. No, we would equally mourn that as a tragedy if it was kids of any race. Um, so a lot of insanity there. And once again, it's such a victim complex to see a tragedy like this unfolding and immediately make it about race, oppression, deportations. It's just evil. So while we're here digging into the dark depths of Sade Perkins' mind, here's something that didn't get as much coverage in the larger news outlets. When she was called out in what appears to be a TikTok comment section, Ms. Perkins doubled down with responses such as, "Pray for the souls of those little girls who are reaping the racist rewards of their parents," and mockingly telling people to go pray about it. Just a moment, I'll pull those up. Yeah, so there you go. And that girl here disputing, saying she went to Camp Mystic and is not white, and that it means a lot to her. It can't just dismiss human lives, all great points. And Sade Perkins demands that she show her face. And then we find out this is a 16-year-old on the internet, and a hostile adult is asking her to face reveal, so a little bit suspicious there. And then another one, final comment that we'll look at here, when somebody rightly says she brought the consequences upon herself, being fired, having negative publicity all over the internet. She says consequences for what? Maybe it was God's will to wash some little bleeps away. So again, just demonic. And it begins to make a whole lot of sense when you start digging a little bit and you find out that her friend, Miss Perkins, is a convicted felon with records of theft slash burglary, family violence, and assault causing bodily injury. So just a trashy person all around. This is so often the case. It is always the ones you most suspect. Now we're going to do a rapid fire round of quotes from various leftists on Twitter who don't matter that much, but nonetheless they have decided to chime in, and just to get a sense of the kind of chatter surrounding this event. Texas deserves the flooding. Cry harder, Texas deserves it. Did it take Rogan with it too? I can only hope. It is God's will, of course. My empathy for these redneck reject states is zero. Greg Abbott starts by invoking God. God may not exist, and if he does, he sent the flooding. So just a course from hell there. And many more along those lines, but you start to get the picture. And then finally come to our last exhibit of evidence, most egregious of all the mocking tweets surrounding the whole affair. This is the one that caught my attention to begin with. And the rather dubious prize of worst tweet goes to far left streamer Destiny of YouTube fame, who posted this. "I heard God killed those kids because they were using NordVPN promo code Destiny to get around the Texas porn ban." Sad face emoji. I don't have harsh enough words to describe this absolute degenerate piece of human trash. And I would probably get suspended from YouTube if I tried, if I used all the words that come into my head. That's like the absolute lowest that somebody can go. Just the amount of dire sins that are brought together in that one tweet. The other quotes that I read for you are almost on the same tier, but there's just one important difference. The other people are mocking the victims because they hate them because of race or political animosity. Destiny is a little bit different. He doesn't have a lot of hate. He just doesn't care. He thinks the whole thing is funny. He thinks it's comedic. And he's using the situation as a setup for a joke and an opportunity to engagement bait. And a man who doesn't care is always far more dangerous and far more unsettling than a man filled with hatred. If you can look at a loss of innocent life and totally disregard it and make it into a joke, you're not only deeply immature, but also, in my eyes, um, there's a major signs that you have pretty much sold your soul out to very dark forces. And I hope he turns it around. But yeah, as for right now, he's standing on very dangerous ground. The one positive takeaway in all of this is that this kind of rhetoric is broadly condemned in the public square. People have been fired, posts have been hastily deleted after people have shot back at them in the comments. Major commentators have been naming and shaming many of the loudest voices that are politicizing this tragedy. And we do have the power, as I like to remind us from time to time, we have power when we speak up to shut these people down. And we're using it very successfully in many cases surrounding this disaster in Texas. So continue to pray for the people of Texas. That's another way that you have power in your voice. Arm yourself with the truth of what's going on. I'll try to keep you informed on this and all other events so you can debunk your leftist friends and enemies. And as always, stay safe out there. Stay blessed. I'll see you next time.